We are in the midst of a very important congressional race, the 3rd District congressional race that was vacated with the death of Congressman Walter Jones, served us for a long time. And the Republican runoff is taking place on July 9th. Dr. Joan Perry and Dr. Greg Murphy are in the running for that Republican runoff. And joining us now and endorsing Dr. Greg Murphy is Congressman Mark Meadows. Good morning, Congressman. How are you?
Good morning. It's great to be with you and all your listeners.
And look forward to, I understand you're going to be coming down to the area this weekend.
Well, I am. You know, they call it God's country. I actually live in the Western Carolina, and so we call that God's country. But my wife and I will be headed down and looking forward to spending about 3 days in the eastern part of the state and look forward to campaigning on behalf of Dr. Greg Murphy.
The Saturday, Congressman Meadows will be at 9 a.m. at the Omarks Building in New Bern, 11 a.m. at the Holiday Travel Park and Resort in Emerald Isle, and 12:30 at Willis Trucking and Construction in Jacksonville. All those are up on the Facebook page, I understand now. But Congressman, as the chair of the Freedom Caucus, why do you find it important to back Dr. Murphy?
Well, Greg is not only someone who will uphold the values, the conservative values that people like Jim Jordan and I have espoused for a long time, but really not be affected by Washington, D.C. I think probably the biggest thing that I've learned since becoming a member of Congress is there are people who will say and do anything to get elected. Mm-hmm. There are people who actually get to Washington, D.C. that are well-intentioned, and they believe that they're going to change it, and they allow Washington, D.C. to change them. And I can tell you that Greg Murphy is not one of those. We obviously vet the candidates that we get behind, and our motto is real simple, is to represent the millions of Americans who believe that Washington, D.C. has forgotten them, those forgotten men and women. And Greg is not only a conservative, but he's someone who is principled. And candidly, he's got a very good life right now. He's a physician. He serves in the state legislature, and yet he felt this higher calling to actually serve in the nation's capital. And so, it's important that everybody votes. Whether it's for Dr. Greg Murphy or for his opponent, it's important that everybody exercises that privilege. But more importantly, it's about taking back this country and giving it to its rightful owner, which is we the people. And certainly a number of us in the Freedom Caucus believe that. We stand with the president in making sure that we have a strong military and those conservative values. For me, I'm a strong pro-life individual. This president has done more for the pro-life cause than any president, and that's a big statement, but I can tell you he's not ashamed of standing up for the values that we hold dear.
How important is this third congressional race? Because we have seen, Congressman Jones held it for a long time, and obviously he was able to attract a lot of Democrats as well. I mean, a lot of times he would tell me, he probably couldn't have won without some Democrat support. How important is it for the cause of conservatism that this 3rd District seat remain Republican?
Well, it's critically important because as you look at the conservative versus liberal scale, there are a number of very hardcore leftists that are getting elected to Congress. And, when you look at the core of North Carolina and everybody that wants to talk about North Carolina, they want to talk about between Raleigh in Charlotte.
Right.
But actually, you and I both know there's a whole lot more to North Carolina than just in between those two cities. And so what we've got to do is those values that are in eastern North Carolina and western North Carolina, we've got to take those to Washington, D.C. And for the conservative cause, if we do not elect members of Congress that are willing to stand in and really sometimes be persecuted for standing up for those values, they'll be lost. When you go up against the Ocasio-Cortez and the Tlaibs, they're on my committees, and I can tell you, they're dead serious about doing things from a progressive agenda. We need to be that serious about supporting conservative causes. For me, it's faith-driven. I can tell you that, I'm a Christian, and I believe that those values that we hold near and dear need to be espoused. So hopefully, will show up on Election Day, not just in this special election, but on the elections to come, and make sure that conservative values, which I believe are predominant throughout our country, we just need to show up and vote and make sure our voice is heard.
Congressman Mark Meadows joining us here today to talk about his endorsement of Dr. Greg Murphy. And you were saying earlier that people sometimes go to Washington and it changes them. The swamp, I guess, the water gets into them. But when we look at a freshman congressman going, how important it is to have that alignment with the Freedom Caucus.
Well, I can tell you it's critically important, and everybody wants to talk about how they're going to be. And one of my favorite movies was Jimmy Stewart, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and they come up and fight, for the forgotten man and woman. And yet what we find is when you get here, there are more people wanting to pat you on the back and tell you how smart you are and how funny you are, but really what they're wanting is your voting card. And for me, my voting card belongs to the people of Western North Carolina that I have the honor and privilege of representing. It's really their voice that counts, but I can also tell you that Greg Murphy is committed to join the Freedom Caucus and actually stand for conservative values. And it's not an alliance to the Freedom Caucus. In fact, I don't want him to be aligned necessarily just with what we support. I want him to be the voice for the people there in the 3rd District of North Carolina. If he will stay loyal to them, then I don't have to worry about him because they'll keep him in check. It's the special interest money, the big lobbying money that comes, with these jobs where they actually try to influence it. I get more small dollar donations from across the country because my allegiance is to the American people, not to some lobbyist here in Washington, D.C. And Greg Murphy is the same way. He's going to not only stand up, but he's going to stand firm. Listen, I love to tell people everybody campaigns as if they have a backbone of steel. But when they get to Washington, D.C., I find out most of the times it's the backbone of a banana. When you peel it back, it gets real mushy. That's not Greg Murphy. He's willing to stand strong, and I'm proud to endorse him.
Well, again, coming down to North Carolina, or coming down to eastern North Carolina, we'll just say God's country exists on the margins of North Carolina.
I love it. That's perfect.
And so the Omark's building at 9 a.m. in New Bern, 11 a.m. at the Holiday Travel Park and Resort in Emerald Isle, 12:30 at Willis Trucking Company in Jacksonville. All those events are open to the public. I saw that Senator Rick Santorum also has endorsed Congressman or Dr. Murphy for Congress. So it's important to have people like you and like Senator Santorum and Jim Jordan. I would imagine on his side, just as it is for Dr. Perry to have her endorsements as well. But once you get to Washington, you got to be on your own, right? I mean, you got to stand on your own.
Well, hopefully you stand on your own, and you're right. You do stand on your own, and I can tell you, I believe that iron sharpens iron, and I can tell you on some of those tough votes where, the pressure is getting great, and you say, well, maybe I can just go ahead and give away this vote. When you got a whole lot of men and women that are around you saying, listen, you got to stand firm, our commitment to the people back home, it actually helps. And I can tell you that as we look together, there will be no better fellow warrior than Greg Murphy to do that. Listen, Walter Jones was a dear friend of mine. I hated to see him, go and pass from this life. A number of us went down to his funeral. The other area that is critically important that Greg Murphy pick up on is really our support for military men and women. And I can tell you that having talked to a number of generals and corporals and colonels and in between, this president stands for a strong military. Greg Murphy does that. The Freedom Caucus does that. And hopefully in all of this, we'll start to take this country back and indeed and return it to its rightful owner.
You understand about diverse interests in Western North Carolina. Here, the 3rd Congressional District, I mean, it's so big. It seems like it's the size of Delaware. It has a huge mix of interests, and that's difficult for any one person to represent. So it is important that we make the right choice here. And of course, there's going to be, and this being a special election, it's very difficult, as you've already mentioned, to get the voters out because it's a one person election coming up on July 9th in this runoff. So nobody's going to go that doesn't already have their minds made up.
Well, that's well said. And listen, I want to make sure I get one clear message to the people that are listening and the people of Eastern North Carolina. I don't pretend to come in and tell anyone how to vote. I can tell you, though, if you choose to vote for Dr. Greg Murphy, I am convinced that he is committed to represent their values, not Washington, D.C. values. And I'm also, I know this, that he will go home before he gives his voting card to anybody other than the people of Eastern North Carolina. And so that's what we need, somebody who's willing to fight. And I can think of no better man to do that.
Again, Congressman Mark Meadows will be in Eastern North Carolina this coming Saturday at 9 a.m. in the Elmarks Building in New Bern, 11 a.m. at the Holiday Travel Park and Resort in Emerald Isle, and 12:30 at Willis Trucking and Construction in Jacksonville. You're going to get a quick tour of the area. We welcome you and your wife here, and thank you for calling us this morning. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you. God bless you, and God bless America.
This is Coastal Daybreak here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240, and our microphones remain open for our supporters and those who are want to throw their endorsements on a candidate's way. And again, that special election coming up on July 9th. This is Coastal Daybreak, and more to come in a moment.